A flash of light could be seen from afar as an eagle soared through the sky. Below the cliff, 3 people could be seen, and one of them seemed to be in trouble. The 2 men told Jiwoo that he should have better luck in his next life. While that bird was still flying, the young man was thrown off the cliff, and as he fell, something happened that made his eyes light up, as if he had seen a profound truth. In another, completely different world, the protagonist seemed to have been transported to another dimension, and while lights appeared outside, there seemed to be someone inside a house. A statue appeared to be revered. It was a sacred place for cultivators, who congratulated the master for successfully advancing. That sacred place was known as the Tower of Seals. Something large, like a spiritual beast, told the master that it would not be used, and that they would return to the tower, remaining silent. Meanwhile, in the dark, Gothic castle, where the moon remained red and bats flew, a man with white hair and red eyes could be seen. Thinking that the Orientals continued to break. Dressed impeccably, with polished shoes, he instructed his subordinates to capture all the nobility. A young woman with the sacred book in the eastern monastery prayed to the creator for power. The evil flew in that direction, seemingly carrying good news. The protagonist was in the sky, appearing to fly freely alongside the eagle, happy to have built his foundation. Someone below shouted for him, asking him to come down. Obeying, he landed in the presence of the man who had called him. That man also explained that the completion of the foundation would take 2,000 years. The master in front of him seemed concerned because the world's energy had weakened greatly. Hearing this, the protagonist appeared worried about the 2,000 years he would need to build his foundation. As that message, resembling a hologram, dissipated before him, he concluded that the energy had indeed diminished. Flying away from that place, Wu Yi found it hard to believe that for him, only 2 days had passed, but in reality, 2,000 years had gone by. As he flew, he noticed something happening nearby. Looking down, he saw 2 men pushing a young man off a cliff. Angry, he asked who they were and how they dared. The 2 well-dressed, armed men were astonished to see a man floating in the sky, unclothed. Even so, their first instinct was to attack him. Wu Yi, looking at the 2, noticed that they had cultivation, but the weapons they used were not from his time. Still, it was not difficult for him to stop the weapons in midair, and he wanted to capture them to learn more about this era. With a simple movement of his hands, he unleashed his power upon them, hitting them squarely and paralyzing them. But he was startled to realize they were too fragile and couldn't withstand even a minimal amount of power. The protagonist, with long black hair, observed from behind the bushes the young man who had fallen off the cliff. Beside the young man, there was a device playing. Finding the device strange, he decided to pick it up and accidentally answer a call from someone shouting on the other end. He noticed that the object had no spiritual energy, yet it was still able to transmit sound. He concluded that after 2,000 years, many dangers must have arisen and that he would need to adopt a different identity. Looking at the fallen young man, he said he would take his belongings and give him a proper burial. Now with the appearance of the young man who had fallen, he thought that if this person had enemies or complications, he would seek revenge. Meanwhile, in Heizo's University City, on a commercial street, a young woman was feeling depressed because she did not want to marry Grandpa Yi's grandson just because he had saved her parents. Her friend told Jinling Xiaoro not to worry, as long as she stayed in that city, her parents wouldn't force her. She explained to her friend Lin Chanshin that the engagement had been arranged by her grandfather, who was gravely injured last year. She couldn't believe she had to marry someone because of that and was thinking about finding a miraculous doctor. Elsewhere, flying in the sky, the protagonist thought that the body he had taken had the same identity as him. In that case, he would borrow that identity and join the sect to learn more. He saw something large and flew in that direction, and inside the airplane, the passengers saw a man flying. The protagonist found it strange that the flying vessel emitted no spiritual energy. As he flew, he thought there were many powerful people he needed to meet, but then he crashed into the window. Inside, there was a couple annoyed by the noise. After hitting the window, he seemed unable to adapt properly and fell to the ground. He realized he had been careless to fall from such a height, but since he was already in the field, he decided to enjoy the scenery, until a shadow covered the landscape and startled the young man. The mere presence of a massive lion left him terrified, to then realize that it was just a little girl with an animal-shaped backpack. That child asked many questions, thinking that the man was tired because he was hungry. He responded politely and also noticed that the girl had no spiritual energy. Flying that short distance had drained all his energy. Because of that, he felt a bit unsteady and sat on the bench, thinking that until he reached the nascent soul stage, he should remain discreet. As he reflected, the young girl nearby offered him a snack as he needed to recover. He thanked her and suggested they eat together. He tasted French fries for the first time. While sitting on the bench, he thought that the world was very chaotic and that mortals didn't even wear proper clothing. He thought about this as he saw 2 girls passing by in extremely short outfits. On the other hand, he noticed that children remained innocent. Even though life was difficult, human nature stayed the same. The young girl became alert when she heard her mother calling for her. The woman, worried, didn't know where her daughter had wandered off to. She had a refined appearance and was accompanied by 2 bodyguards. As soon as she saw her concerned mother, the girl quickly jumped off the bench to run to her. One of the woman's bodyguards didn't ask any questions and immediately lunged to strike the protagonist. He managed to dodge the first punch. But then, the man grabbed his head and arm at the same time. He tried to twist his arm and slam his head against the bench. However, just the protagonist's mental power was enough to make the man back away. The bodyguard, stepping back, said that he would like to fight him again and asked him to wait. The young wealthy woman wondered why old Hai was so eager to fight. Meanwhile, the little girl clapped her hands, thinking that the older brother was very strong. The worried mother asked Yin Yin what she was doing with that young man. After hearing her daughter's explanation, the woman ordered the bodyguard to apologize. Bowing, he apologized to the protagonist, who was still sitting on the bench, saying that he had thought he was a kidnapper. Being very polite, the woman approached him, thanked him for taking care of her daughter, and handed him a package. The car was already prepared for their departure, but the little girl wanted to say goodbye to the friend she had made. When he held the girl's hands, he noticed that despite her young age, she already had a strange illness. Placing his hand in his pocket, he concluded that curing her wouldn't be difficult. He whispered to the girl and gave her a pill, telling her that if she didn't feel well, she could take that candy. After that, she went to meet her mother in the car, and he bid farewell. The driver informed the woman that they had an appointment with the miraculous doctor, Dr. Xu. The driver noticed that the girl was holding something in her hands, and she asked to play with it a little before throwing it away. To please her, the mother said that she could have high hopes for the miraculous doctor. Meanwhile, the girl seemed fascinated by the pill she held, but suddenly she started to feel unwell, and the mother asked how she was feeling. Worried, she urged the driver to go faster to meet the miraculous doctor. The little girl, holding the pill, remembered what the young man had said about it at the park. At Dr. Xu's house, while organizing his books, he noticed someone arriving in distress. The woman entered, begging the doctor to save her daughter's life. The doctor asked the lady to calm down, as healing the sick was his calling. After saying that, he checked the little one's pulse. After sighing, the doctor told the lady that she should prepare for the worst, as there was nothing he could do. Upon hearing those words, the woman began to feel faint and recalled the happy moments she had lived with her daughter. Desperate, the mother prostrated herself at the doctor's feet, pleading for him to save Yin Yin's life. She cried and begged for help, but the doctor explained that all he could do was ease the girl's pain. Being honest, he said that only the 9 Revolutions rejuvenation pill could cure her. As the girl held the pill in her hands, it began to release an aroma. In the middle of his explanation, the doctor noticed the intense fragrance coming from the child's direction. It was such a distinctive scent that he couldn't ignore it. When he looked at her, he saw something slipping from her hands. Quickly, he caught it before the small sphere hit the ground. Bringing the pill to his nose and smelling its aroma, he realized that it was exactly the formula he needed. The mother explained that she had helped a man in a poor state, and he had given that pill to her daughter. Shocked, the doctor told the woman that this pill might be what could save the girl's life. Amid tears and sobs, she asked if her daughter could be saved. He, showing joy, raised his hands and proclaimed himself the best doctor, saying that no one could surpass him. Handing the pill to the child, he told the mother that the man who had given her the pill was not poor at all. He assured her that her daughter would be fine, only needing some rest. When the woman thanked the doctor, he replied that she should actually thank the young man who had given her the pill. Then he asked the woman to introduce him to the young man, as he wanted to learn more about him. However, the woman admitted that she did not know him either, but the driver recalled seeing the young man in front of a university, and based on his age, assumed that was where he studied. The woman thought it was a good idea, and quickly went to the university to find out who that young man was. Meanwhile, the doctor thought he should help this sacred existence remain hidden. Now calmer, the mother believed that her family should strengthen ties with that young man. Far from all this commotion, the protagonist was strolling when he received a call. He found it strange since that device had only rung once before and had been silent for a long time. Out of nowhere, it rang again. Answering the call, he heard a voice on the other end asking where he was. As the person spoke, he found the voice familiar and asked if they were free for lunch. That voice brought tears to his eyes. It was as if he had been transported to another time and place just by hearing it. Then he told his aunt not to worry, as he would arrive in time for lunch. He became pensive because first, he had encountered a young man with the same name as his, and now this aunt had the same voice as his master's wife. He also remembered that before leaving, his master had left some items stored on the sect's property. He thought that perhaps these things could help him find answers. In the grand mansion, someone was upset that the aunt had invited the young man for lunch. A friend commented that he might surprise them with his looks, but the young woman replied that she was not that superficial. The friend compared the unknown young man to Zhang Shan, the student council president. While they were discussing, someone arrived and asked if Aunt Ju was home. Outside, the visitor asked if this was the Yunwu mountain villa that Zhao had mentioned. As he called out, the two girls observed him while hiding behind some bushes. They remembered that the bodyguard had gone to fetch the aunt, so they were alone at the villa. Talking among themselves, they decided to call the Lion King to scare him off. With their plan in place, the blonde with long hair ordered the Lion King to come out. The huge animal leaped toward the protagonist at the gate. While the lion growled at the young man, the short-haired girl asked her friend if this would really work. However, to their surprise, the exact opposite happened. The Lion King, instead of attacking, behaved like a tame kitten. That enormous animal now resembled a small, affectionate dog, rubbing against the bars for affection. As he spoke to the animal, the protagonist heard that voice again. Turning around, he saw an image that brought back memories. The woman before him looked very much like his master's wife. Seeing the woman approach, he noticed how much she resembled not only the voice, but also the appearance of his master's wife. The woman found it amusing how the young man addressed her and said that he could call her as he always did, Aunt Jo. He watched as the daughter threw herself into her mother's arms, saying she had missed her. The girl then told her mother that the man had entered and scared the Lion King. Seeing that her daughter was being rude to the guest, Jo lightly tapped her. Then she asked her to stop being impolite and properly greet the young man. The girl barely had time to protest when her mother said that this man was someone she had grown up with. Quickly, Jo pushed her daughter toward the young man and asked her to show him around the house. Then she said she had something to do and that her daughter should take good care of their guest. Excited, the protagonist thought the young woman would strike up a conversation and said it was a pleasure to meet her. However, he was left hanging, as the girl had already left long ago. Still, he was not worried. He thought he would treat these people as if they were his family from 2,000 years later. As he entered the property, he felt something strange and quickly noticed a spiritual formation. He quickly realized that the formation was draining the vitality of the master's family. The protagonist concluded that whoever had done this did not even understand the basics. The spoiled young woman compared the place where he lived to that grand mansion. It was also mentioned that this place used to be an abandoned building. But 18 years ago, her grandfather met a feng shui master who altered the earth's energy veins. Picking up a tree leaf, the protagonist asked if that feng shui master was very powerful. Excited, the young woman recounted that years ago, when her grandfather fell ill, it was this master who saved his life. With this information, the protagonist started to become suspicious of this so-called feng shui master. As they strolled through the property, the young woman showed him the mansion, but with great reluctance. At that moment, an employee arrived, addressing the protagonist as Mr. Yi, which led the young woman to reprimand him. However, the protagonist remained polite, hoping the situation would improve. After lunch, the girls were petting the dog. Xiaora was visibly upset, thinking that her mother was flattering the intruder for no reason. Her friend suggested that she spend more time at school and not return home, or that she join Professor Wang's team. The blonde girl found the idea fantastic and decided she would call the professor later to start attending his classes. Looking out the window, she thought about giving up all holidays, leaving the young man alone at home. Her friend found Xiaora's attitude a bit cruel. Meanwhile, the young man was talking to Aunt Ju and asked her to take a health pill to Grandfather John. The woman took the pill and thanked him. Happy with her kindness, he accompanied her to the car door, thinking that with her help, he now had an interesting identity. As she left, he reflected that he would rest for a day before joining the sect disguised as a university. Suddenly, he felt the malicious intent of a martial artist, and he was right. Nearby, several men were ready to finally complete their mission to eliminate him. They surrounded the mansion, observing the protagonist's every move. Believing they could catch him off guard, the men threw a sharp object in his direction. In an instant, they all lunged at him, trying to corner him in some way. They shouted so loudly behind the man that birds began to fly away. They believed that this guy was incredibly bold for eliminating their comrades. Each of them wanted to give the young man two choices, since he seemed young and might understand. However, before they could even present the second option, they were caught off guard by the protagonist's swift movement. The henchman thought he was different, but despite that, the leader was not surprised at all. He ordered them to split up and search until they found him. The leader was already thinking that if he could learn that disappearing technique, his status would rise significantly. Even so, he remained calm because he had a compass capable of locating that man anywhere. However, he found it strange when the object started pointing at himself. Before he could react, the enemy caught him off guard. With just a light strike, he felt his eyes closing. After tying up the leader and his subordinates, the protagonist wanted them all to confess why they were pursuing him. The group's leader remained silent, only thinking about how impressive that boy's skills were. However, he said nothing because he was even more terrified of another person. For that reason, they all preferred to poison themselves rather than deal with that other man. Yiwu, seeing this, realized they were part of a highly trained squad. Not knowing who the person behind his new identity had angered, he thought it best to train more. Creating a blue flame in his hands, he cast it over the bodies on the ground. Leaving no traces behind, he proceeded toward the university. Elsewhere, some people were searching for news about the group that had been sent after the protagonist. Checking the systems, they realized there were no longer any life signals from them, as if they had disappeared. This left a man in the shadows extremely furious. That group had many resources and was trying to locate the missing members using a drone. After analyzing the data and confirming that there had been a fight at the site where the soldiers vanished, the man became enraged. Losing control, he released his power upon those around him. The force he unleashed was so overwhelming that it tore doors and windows apart. His order was clear: send someone competent to finish the job. Shortly after, a trio was assigned to the mission. Far from there, the protagonist seemed to be having trouble with public transportation. The technology in this world was too futuristic for him. He chose to keep a low profile as he didn't know what kind of attention he might attract. As he reflected on this, he passed by a man accompanied by two women. The man seemed to be unwell. This caught the protagonist's attention and he stopped to take a closer look. When he approached, the women warned him to be careful, saying that it was probably a scam. Looking at them, he thought that in this chaotic world, people had become cold and indifferent. However, his master had always taught him to avoid injustice. For that reason, he decided to do his part and placed a pill in the man's mouth, leaving him leaning against the wall and departing shortly after. He thought that man was lucky to have encountered him. As he walked away, the women who had been skeptical before were now mesmerized. Meanwhile, the man who had fallen ill was still resting against the wall. Suddenly, he opened his eyes as if he had returned to life. Another person nearby showed concern for his health. The man knew he had suffered an attack, but now, still a bit dazed, he remembered the young man who had given him the pill. After being helped to his feet, he concluded that he needed to repay his benefactor's kindness. Now at Heishu University, Shounen was relieved to be back, as it allowed her to escape from the protagonist. Her friend mentioned that she had heard a new student had transferred in and hoped he was handsome. The teacher asked for silence as she was about to welcome the new classmate. Some girls found the young man attractive, but Shounen thought he looked somewhat familiar. Suddenly, the two friends began whispering about the possibility that the guy was Yiwu. The teacher asked the new student to introduce himself. The young man chose to introduce himself using his real name, Yi Beacon. Since he was brief, he ended up attracting the attention of the girls in the class. Shounen felt relieved when she noticed that, despite having the same surname, their names were different. Her friend, however, wasted no time and told the teacher there was a seat available next to her. Since the seat was near Shounen, the teacher asked her what she thought of the idea. The young woman, showing great interest, said it would be wonderful to sit next to him. However, before the teacher could direct Yi Beacon to the seat, he had already left. She only sighed as she watched him walk away, while the nearby girls admired his presence. Ignoring several requests to sit next to other female students, he approached a young woman with short hair and asked if he could sit with her. As the protagonist settled beside the beautiful young woman, some guys observed from a distance, unhappy with his attitude. It didn't take long before the bell rang for the break, prompting several students to leave the classroom. Out in the hallway, a tall blonde young man placed a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, clearly looking for trouble. His red-haired friend became irritated and told him to stay away from Shounen. Remaining calm, Yiwu smiled and assured them that he would stay far away from that girl, even taking detours if necessary. Now at a slight distance from the three, he couldn't resist making a small spark appear in the red-haired guy's hair. Even so, none of the three noticed that the young man's red hair was starting to smoke. Meanwhile, Yiwu continued toward the courtyard, while inside the hallway, the shouting grew louder as the young man's hair caught fire. Outside, he reflected on how pointless it was for someone to pretend to have power if they didn't possess enough cultivation. Going down the stairs, he wanted to find out where the library was, as he was interested in taking a look. As he searched for the library, two girls commented on the fact that he had chosen Wu Taiying to sit beside. Seeing him approach, they thought he might be coming after one of them. However, he spotted the two from a distance and didn't seem pleased with what he saw. To make things worse, a bird flew by and defecated on his impeccably polished shoe. Irritated, he simply bent down to clean it, while the wind lifted Xiaoru's skirt, forcing her to hold it down with her hands. Her short-haired friend, seeing the young man kneeling to clean his shoe, thought he was confessing his feelings to Xiaoru. Xiaoru, hearing her friend say that, rushed away, shouting that she was still young and didn't want to commit to anyone. The protagonist was completely confused because, in his view, one couldn't confess their feelings to someone without at least holding flowers. Elsewhere, the red-haired young man, now completely bald, was furious upon realizing he had been tricked. Now the bald young man was filled with hatred. Not only had he lost his hair, but he also believed that the guy had confessed his love to Kishoro. His intention now was to castrate the protagonist so he wouldn't cause any more trouble for his goddess. Meanwhile, the protagonist was in the library, flipping through some books, while a few classmates laughed at him. However, the lettering on the door caught his attention as it seemed familiar. He thought there might be some kind of executive method there. It was the ancient documents room, and someone in the library tried to warn him about it. Shortly after, one of the professors entered the library and asked for silence, as it was not a place for chatting. One of the guards asked if the professor was looking for a specific book, and he replied that he needed some ancient documents. The professor then wanted to know who was inside the ancient documents room, as the door was open. The guard promptly responded that he would catch whoever had entered without permission. Unconcerned, the protagonist was inside the room, examining some interesting scriptures. Unaware, the guard barged in, shouting at him and placing a hand on his shoulder, demanding that he leave immediately. The protagonist, however, simply replied that he was there to read, but the guard didn't want to hear it, believing he wasn't qualified to be there. The professor, on the other hand, warned the young man to be careful with the documents, as they were ancient and could not be damaged. While the guard insisted on removing the young man immediately, the professor asked him to wait a moment. The professor thought the young man seemed familiar somehow, and then he remembered he was the one who had helped him before. With this realization, while the guard wanted to punish him, the professor ordered him to quickly apologize to the young man. Hearing the professor's reprimand, the guard thought he had offended a powerful connection. Meanwhile, other students murmured that the young man didn't even understand the basics and was there just to cause trouble. One thought those boys liked to make a fuss. However, he saw this as a great opportunity to test if his benefactor could understand those texts. Seeing all the commotion, the protagonist figured he must have done something wrong in that sect and knew he couldn't afford to lose his disguise. So he made his best effort and read an article from the ancient manuscript aloud. Listening to every word spoken by the young man, the professor realized that he could even fill in the missing gaps in the text. This was his own research, and word for word, it was unbelievable. Meanwhile, everyone wanted to know if the young man had read it correctly. Turning around and looking at the professor, he saw that the man was crouched down and became concerned for his well-being. When the professor stood up and said he was fine, the protagonist had a feeling that he seemed familiar. After thinking for a while, he realized that the man in front of him was the same one he had helped before. However, it didn't make sense. After taking one of those pills, he should have been as strong as an ox, but instead he looked like he was falling apart. Suspicious that the man just wanted more pills, the protagonist quickly left that place. The professor, on the other hand, was curious about which book the student had taken and asked the guard to check. After some time, the guard brought the book for the professor to examine. The professor's astonishment was visible. How could someone so noble pick such a simple book? As the protagonist left the library, he was being watched by the trio waiting for their revenge. This did not go unnoticed by the protagonist, who realized they were heading toward him. Moreover, he noticed that there were two distinct groups. With a broad smile, he decided he would have some fun with both of them. Hours passed, and he allowed the groups to follow him to the house where he was staying. Mockingly, he tilted his head back and asked, since they had been following him for so long, if they wanted to take a break. The closest group was the school trio seeking revenge because he had confessed to the goddess Shioro. That was why the latest bald guy had followed him, intending to castrate him. However, the second group also wanted to put an end to the protagonist. As a result, the two groups ended up clashing with each other. Being better prepared, the second group was overwhelming the first. The masked one shouted to the others that they should retrieve the thing first, as all of this was starting to annoy the protagonist. All those people seemed like flies chasing after him, demanding something that he had no idea about. When he said he didn't know what they were talking about, they accused him of pretending and charged at him. Without much effort, he simply leaped and dodged the attacks. The group's leader, a man wearing a black mask, declared that he would not let the young man escape. Since the protagonist was already fed up with all of them, he had no intention of letting them take another step. Irritated, he conjured several chains in their direction and demanded to know why they wanted to eliminate the master's family. He also mentioned that he had recently been worrying about how to break that formation. Now that the enemies had delivered themselves on a silver platter, he would make good use of their sacrifice. With his magic, he managed to undo the formation in the blink of an eye. Elsewhere, the person responsible for the formation felt the exact moment it was broken. The old man with white hair turned and called one of his vassals. The servant promptly responded to his master, asking what he could do. The master ordered him to go and investigate what had happened. When the team did not return, someone had to go to the mansion to investigate the situation. On one of the gate's pillars, a man observed and confirmed that the young man had burned all the evidence. The protagonist, now in another location, sneezed on the street and thought that someone might be talking or thinking about him. While reflecting on this, he remained still and a man exercising accidentally bumped into him. The collision was so strong that the man fell to the ground, completely confused. After colliding with the protagonist, the man was clearly unhappy about the interruption to his workout. Snorting like a wild animal, he planted his feet firmly on the ground. Then he jumped over the protagonist as if he were just another obstacle in his daily routine. After this, the young athlete noticed that his pocket was torn. Leaving the scene, he headed to a hideout where a man, poorly disguised, was staring at an empty wallet. Disheartened, he believed that man had made him waste his time. Later, the protagonist continued on his way and went to the male dormitory of the university. Upon reaching his assigned room, he knocked on the door, and the person inside asked who it was. Without any concern, a chubby guy stepped out, but upon seeing the protagonist, he immediately started sweating profusely. Yiwoo, looking at the guy, thought his clothes seemed familiar. After analyzing him more carefully, he realized that he was the same old man in disguise who had stolen his wallet earlier. However, since he would have to live with him, he decided to pretend he hadn't recognized him. Acting cordially, he introduced himself, stating his name and that he was a freshman in philosophy, class 2. The young man, visibly nervous, returned the greeting and gave his name, though he thought things had already gone too far. Yiwoo, upon entering, observed the dorm carefully and thought that this was how things worked in this century. His roommate mentioned that since it was their first time meeting, he could buy him a snack. Later, the two were in a place having a meal. While they were there, a classmate of the protagonist arrived, which surprised him quite a bit. He looked at her and asked what she was doing there so late. Somewhat embarrassed, she replied that she worked there part-time. While speaking to a fellow student at another table, someone was being rude. Still, the young woman remained polite, explaining that the grilled fish at that table was still being prepared. In response to the complaint from that table, she approached, apologizing. However, they felt that an apology was not enough. Taking advantage of the fact that the young woman was apologizing, one of the men was rude, making inappropriate proposals. When she did not respond, he said she couldn't just reject him like that. Losing his patience, he stood up, grabbed the young woman's arm, and claimed that he was very well known in that area. Seeing and hearing the situation unfold, the protagonist could not hold back and stepped forward. He caught the man's attention and slapped his hand away to free the young woman. Noticing the rising tension, the chubby guy advised him to reconsider, but the protagonist said he would not. The man believed he was powerful and thought his authority would resolve the situation easily. He ordered his lackeys to take down the protagonist. The chubby guy, realizing he couldn't just let this happen, thought that calling the police might be the best way to protect his roommate. Meanwhile, the situation escalated as one of the men lunged at the protagonist. The protagonist simply tilted his head slightly to dodge the attack. Then, with just a single punch, he sent all three men flying. The scene looked like something out of an action movie, and the chubby guy could hardly believe his eyes. Meanwhile, the young woman asked the chubby guy if his roommate knew martial arts. A bit further away stood the orange-haired man with glasses, who, after having started the entire commotion, was now feeling threatened. Having already dealt with some of them, the protagonist asked if it was over. However, the man with glasses said he wasn't so easily intimidated. He pulled out a sharp object and pointed it at the protagonist, thinking that this would scare him. Everything happened so quickly that, in an instant, the man was already on the ground, on his knees, begging for forgiveness. The protagonist didn't know where to look, at the young woman who was incredibly impressed, or at his roommate. Gazing at the stars, he worried about how late it was for the young woman to return home. The young woman, visibly afraid, asked if he could accompany her home. Taking her hand, he walked with her toward her house. Along the way, she told him that her mother was seriously ill. Listening to everything she said, he thought that he should help her in the future. Seeing that the young man had stopped, the girl asked what was wrong. He said he was just distracted. However, he didn't realize that the strange sensation he had felt was something unusual. Meanwhile, the girl mentioned that she had arrived home. Even so, he didn't leave immediately, waiting for her to enter first. At the same time, he felt a sinister aura in the air. He noticed that the strange aura was similar to spiritual energy. He knew that in this century, spiritual energy was weak, but in that place, it was intense. He needed to investigate later. He watched as a leaf with the words, "Dark Owner," fell out of nowhere in front of him. The next day, in the men's restroom, the trio was once again chasing the protagonist. They believed they could catch him off guard and capture him. Thinking they had succeeded, they threw a cloak over his face, covering his body, and started hitting him. No one knew what was happening inside, but many heard loud screams coming from the restroom. After some time, the three who had tried to grab the protagonist earlier were now on their knees, begging for forgiveness. The protagonist made it clear that simply apologizing wasn't enough, and one of them asked what they should do to earn it. Seeing that things were looking bad, the troublemaker with the shaved head tried to buy his freedom with money. With that proposal, he received a slap in the face. Annoyed, the protagonist asked if he looked like a beggar. Giving him another flick on the forehead, He questioned if that was all he was worth. Things weren't looking good for the trio, so the newly bald one offered 1,000, but the protagonist knew he was worth much more than that and said he could forgive them for 10,000. After 1,000 years, he was surprised that people still used wallets, but at least he got what he needed. Among the three, one asked if they should really go through with this. The leader told them to stay quiet. The newly bald one thought it was better to take care of their injuries first and then figure out how to deal with that intruder. When the bell rang for the start of class, the teacher was already writing the lesson on the board. Meanwhile, the protagonist started talking to the classmate next to him, asking if her family was looking for a tenant. A little embarrassed, he said he wanted to rent her family's house. At first, she was surprised. Smiling, he confirmed that it was true and that he even had the money ready for the rent. While he was talking to the young woman, the teacher became irritated, thinking he wasn't showing the proper respect. Regarding that, the protagonist told the teacher that her yin-yang was unbalanced. Still very annoyed, she had no idea what the student was talking about. When he tried to explain, she interrupted him. Furious, she made it clear that she didn't allow students with poor performance in her class and ordered him to leave. The protagonist made it clear to the teacher that he would continue studying in the library. Turning to his classmate, he asked her to reserve the rental for him. As he left, the teacher continued her lesson, now without anyone to disrupt it. Near the book on her desk, her phone rang. When she answered, she realized it was Professor Wine calling her. She couldn't believe that such an important figure was calling her. However, he wanted her to send a student to him. When she looked at the class and asked who Yi Bai Chen was, the classmate sitting next to him quickly told her that he was the student she had just expelled from the classroom. The teacher was furious. She couldn't believe she had done something so complicated. Now deep in thought, she left the room, realizing she had messed with someone who had good connections. While the teacher worried, the protagonist was calmly reading a book in the library. He had no idea that the teacher was, at that moment, rushing toward him. Out of breath, she arrived at the library looking for the student. He turned around and asked what she was doing there. Quickly, she tried to make amends, apologizing for kicking him out of the classroom. She told the student that Professor Wang had personally invited him to join his team. As the teacher approached the student, he told her he didn't know this professor. After saying that he could meet him at the museum in the east, she noticed that the young man didn't pay her any attention. She wanted to know if he wasn't curious. He simply replied that he would finish reading the book first. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, the trio that had the misfortune of clashing with the protagonist was gathered there. The leader had an idea. He knew the boss of that street and decided to call him later. After some time, they saw their rival passing nearby. The bald one decided that this time, he wouldn't hold back against that man, so he called the street boss as he needed support and reinforcements. The problem was that the person they were talking about was none other than the protagonist. However, the orange-haired man had no idea. The guy simply sped up his motorcycle, pulling a wheelie to reach the location faster. Meanwhile, the trio believed that they would finally get their revenge on the protagonist. As the leader of the group, the bald man was determined to take back the money they had given him. Seeing the commotion they were making, the protagonist asked what they wanted. Jiusheng said that before they had failed to defeat him, but now they had someone powerful on their side. As he was talking about having called someone, the orange-haired man arrived at the scene. He immediately asked where the person causing all the trouble was. But when the bald man pointed at Yi Wu as their target, the orange-haired man nearly had a heart attack, recognizing the protagonist immediately. Suspicious, he looked at the protagonist and realized that he was not someone to mess with again. However, the protagonist, seeing that the man had arrived, asked if he was the one who would handle the situation. Chong, realizing that the bald man had dragged him into trouble, slapped him across the face. The bald man, holding his face, didn't understand why he was getting hit. He was astonished to see his leader bowing and apologizing, claiming he had been mistaken about that young man. Still holding his face, the bald man thought that he had never seen that man apologize to anyone before. The protagonist, mocking the bald man, walked up to him and told him to resolve the situation himself. And once again, he dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness. Running out of patience with the young man, the protagonist asked if he was trying to irritate him again. Bowing and looking up at the protagonist, he asked how much he was willing to pay for the mental distress he had caused. Lei Jiu could hardly believe that there was now a fee for mental damages as well. Seeing that the young man was hesitating, the protagonist raised his hand to educate him, but the young man quickly agreed to settle the debt. Realizing he had no other way out, he handed over his card, saying that there was enough money in it. Walking away satisfied with the man's card, the protagonist told him that he was free to try confronting him again. While everything unfolded, someone was watching him from the bushes, thinking he was just using a few tricks. But the protagonist quickly sensed that presence. He also noticed that someone had destroyed a trap he had set at the mansion. With that, he thought that his master's wife was in danger and launched himself toward the location as fast as possible. The person who had been watching him reported that he had left. After some time, he was floating above the mansion and noticed a deadly aura surrounding it. His eyes scanned the mansion and spotted something. It seemed that he was seeing the aura of several people, and besides that, more seemed to be approaching from a distance. However, this only heightened the protagonist's eagerness to fight. Floating in the air, he seemed to walk toward those people. In just a few moments, he was already on the ground, surrounded by multiple individuals. The master's envoy announced that he was there because of the formation that the intruder had broken, and he wanted to know why the man before him had destroyed that formation. However, the protagonist had no interest in talking to those nobodies and immediately struck them all. He disarmed several in an instant and warned that if they didn't want to be severely punished, they should get out of his way. Seeing that those people were useless, he threw his weapon into the ground between them and simply let go of it in the air. Seeing their leader going down, he shouted at the others to do something. Hearing the orders, they all agreed and attempted to stop the intruder. However, the protagonist was not an easy target to reach or take down. Elsewhere, another team was waiting for him and tracking his movements with a compass. The leader of the group announced that their target was close and told everyone to get ready for the attack. Looking around and seeing so many people present, the protagonist became excited as he could now fight at full power. He landed on the battlefield once again and spoke loudly, declaring that if anyone was following him, they should stop and face him. Some of them were impressed, as they believed they had been observing in secret. The team lying in ambush in the forest mistook the group following the protagonist for reinforcements. Because of this, their leader ordered them to eliminate everyone with the protagonist. Iwu, seeing that his plan was working, was quite satisfied. Those who had been following him were caught off guard when they realized they were under attack. Then they started fighting among themselves, just as the protagonist had intended. At one point, the group chasing him launched an attack against the others. Suddenly, everything turned into chaos, and everyone started attacking each other. Meanwhile, the protagonist calmly ate his apple, thinking he could sit somewhere and watch the battle. The two teams were facing off and realized that both sides were quite strong. When everything was nearly over, the protagonist decided to fly over the area and, getting closer, asked if they needed help. It was only after the leaders of both gangs were the only ones left that the protagonist decided to reveal what was really happening. At that moment, both of them noticed they had the same goal from the very beginning. They realized they had been manipulated into fighting each other exactly as the protagonist had planned. Between them, the protagonist laughed loudly, finding it amusing that they only had muscles. Having offended both, neither of them liked it, and the situation worsened when they realized his scheme. Acting carefree, he simply pointed a finger at one of them, insulting their intelligence. The man holding the compass could barely contain his rage and charged at the protagonist, trying to attack him. He managed to get close, but not close enough to land a hit. Dodging effortlessly, the protagonist was surprised, thinking that someone so mediocre shouldn't be this incompetent. Completely out of patience, he simply delivered a powerful kick to the man's face, sending him flying. The master's envoy noticed that his opponent had an incredibly strong footwork technique. Even after taking that kick, the man still managed to get up, grumbling. Bored of fighting weaklings, the protagonist suggested that the two of them team up so they could fight better. However, the man in the jumpsuit thought he could handle everything on his own. With this mindset, he launched an attack, swearing he would finally strike the protagonist. For a moment, he had the illusion that he had split the protagonist in two. This made the big man in the jumpsuit feel slightly satisfied, but his joy was short-lived as he soon heard the protagonist's voice right next to him, making a teasing remark. Before he could react, he received a strong flick to the forehead. Coming from the protagonist, it wasn't just any flick. It was such a powerful hit that it made the big man's brain rattle. The impact was so strong that he collapsed to the ground, slightly dazed, shocking the other one watching. Now the protagonist turned to the remaining man and told him he was next. Trembling, the man realized that this guy was truly strange. Seeing that things were looking bad, he decided to run, saying he would let the protagonist escape just for today. His luck wasn't great. As fast as a flash, the protagonist moved in front of him. This made the man feel as if the protagonist had just driven a spear through his heart. The shock was so intense that he fell to the ground, unable to do much. After realizing that no one was in any condition to continue fighting, the protagonist left the area. Another day at the university, and Q was thinking that it had been a long time since anyone had joined that team. Curious to see who the chosen ones would be this time, she waited until people started entering the room. Xiaoru walked in, greeting Q, who was sitting on the table. Happy, Q returned the greeting and asked if everyone was there since she had someone new to introduce. When they asked who it was, the woman said the person should be on their way. Arriving and making a good impression, the protagonist asked if this was the Kin project team. The spoiled blonde was impressed to see that it was none other than her classmate, Yi Beacon. The woman, who radiated intelligence, confirmed that this was indeed the Kin project. Walking toward the young man, she deduced that he must be the new team member. Seeing that this handsome young man would be part of the team, Gan was very pleased. Xiaoru wanted to get closer to the protagonist, but thought it was better to keep a bit of distance. When the man near her noticed where she was looking, he became jealous. Meanwhile, the student asked where Professor Wang was and was informed that he was in a meeting. Observing the protagonist talking, someone seemed to have come up with a plan. Covering their mouth, they thought that later there would be quite a scene. Moments later, something in the protagonist's pocket beeped like an anti-theft alarm. Seeing that the plan had worked, the man shouted as loudly as he could, accusing someone of stealing. 2 guards arrived, wanting to know who was causing trouble. The jealous man pointed at the protagonist, saying he was the thief. But the protagonist had nothing on him and quickly realized that the man had planted an item on him to frame him. The woman he had been talking to asked what he had taken, even though he insisted he hadn't taken anything. Now with the plan in motion, the jealous man claimed that he had seen the young man take a pearl. With a sly smile, the protagonist said the guard could search him as much as he wanted. With the protagonist's permission, one of the guards began checking his pockets. After the search, the guard looked at his colleague and confirmed that he hadn't found anything. Amid all that commotion, the jealous man ended up making a fool of himself. The protagonist then pointed out that the only one who had shouted was that man, so the pearl could only be with him. Things were not going well for the schemer who had tried to set up the protagonist. Following the protagonist's suggestion, the man allowed the guard to check his pockets. Understanding his duty, the guard asked the young man to raise his arms for a more thorough inspection. Just as he had done with the protagonist, the guard thoroughly checked that man's pockets as well. Unlike the protagonist, this time, the guard found something in his pocket. Shocked by what it was, he pulled the pearl from the scheming man's pocket. The man had no idea how that object had ended up there. Q, who had been unfair to the protagonist, now saw who the real culprit was. To make matters worse, the man ended up confessing that he had thrown the pearl into Yi's clothes to frame him. The protagonist simply observed the situation, thinking that with such a low level of intelligence, that guy couldn't even compare to him. As soon as he noticed that a pearl had been planted in his pocket, he had simply acted, returning the pearl to the pocket of the one who had thrown it. Now the one in trouble was the schemer, as the woman declared that, despite him not having actually stolen anything, his actions were unacceptable and would not be tolerated. No matter how much he begged, the older sister did not change her mind. She merely told him that he was reaping what he had sown. Ku tried to apologize on behalf of the team for the misunderstanding. The protagonist said it was no problem, as long as the truth had come to light. She then suggested having dinner together to make amends. Hours later at night, they were gathered at a place for some drinks. The protagonist seemed to be having a great time. Drinking something, he found it quite refreshing. Everyone had gathered at the place where his classmate worked part-time. Q was curious as to why he had chosen that spot among so many options. Meanwhile, the waitress was serving the dishes. Seeing an opportunity, he asked if Wu Ting would show him the house. Catching her off guard, he continued, saying there was no need to wait for another day. It could be that very night. Xiaoru had no idea what was happening between the two. Now satisfied with the meal, the protagonist bid farewell to the others, telling them to keep celebrating as he had things to do. After saying that, he took the young woman's arm and loudly announced that the two of them were heading to her house right then. While the blonde pouted, she overheard some people at another table commenting that those two definitely had something going on. Hearing that conversation made her extremely irritated, as she still believed she had a chance with that man. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, the young woman was showing the protagonist the house, opening the window to reveal the view. Looking outside, he said it was very beautiful. The girl mentioned that it wasn't too expensive, only $500 per month. Without hesitation, he pulled out a credit card, handed it to her, and said there were $10,000 on it, and he would pay more when he moved in. Responding to the young woman, he explained that he intended to rent the place for a long time, so that amount wasn't much at all. Visibly pleased, she told him he should get some rest and that she would leave first. After she left, he began familiarizing himself with the spiritual energy of that location. As he had suspected, the energy there was indeed rich and was starting to concentrate. But a loud growl caught his attention, interrupting his cultivation. He went to the window to see what it was, and without hesitation, jumped down to the ground. From a distance, he recognized the Lion King, but he didn't know what it was doing there. However, the great beast was about to engage in a duel with a spiritual beast in the form of a wolf. The protagonist watched, finding it strange for a spiritual beast to be in that place. In a short time, he understood what was happening and rushed toward the creature with full force. With an explosive attack, he unleashed enough energy to leave the beast stunned. He watched as the creature attempted to make another move. Still unsatisfied, he pried open the monster's mouth to see what was inside, then launched another strike. It was a powerful kick that sent the beast flying far away, engulfed in smoke and dust. He observed the trail left by the creature as it was thrown. The protagonist did all of this without losing the elegance of his movements. The great spiritual beast, after being thrown, lay still with its 4 legs up. Disbelieving that it had lost, it opened only one eye as it watched the enemy approach. The protagonist was already prepared for the final blow while the creature growled. After a flash of light and a surge of power, all that remained was the core. At that moment, the core seemed to be under the protagonist's evaluation. Shortly after, it was absorbed into him. This caused him to acquire a somewhat angelic power, huge white wings, and a glowing halo that appeared around him. However, he soon returned to the ground, and the mighty Lion King did not seem pleased. Yi Wu asked the beast if it was acting that way because he had taken its prey and devoured it. Even in its anger, the Lion King jumped toward a trash bin and began rummaging through it. Finding the great beast's behavior suspicious, the protagonist continued to observe its next moves. Then something caught his attention, making his eyes widen. It was just as he had suspected. There was a spiritual vein there. Now everything made sense. No wonder so many spiritual beasts appeared in that place, drawn by the powerful energy emanating from it. Flipping through a book, he noted that this location was a Feng Shui treasure land. This sparked his interest in cultivating the 1,000-mile eye technique. It was exactly as he had imagined. The strength of that place was real and intense. The energy was so strong that his technique worked perfectly. That technique allowed him to see through walls and across great distances. Watching his roommate prepare to take a shower, his senses started to react strangely. Even so, he couldn't stop looking despite already blushing and drooling. After a brief display of his power, the day finally dawned. Now the young woman was outside with an ambulance. The sound of the vehicle and the commotion woke the protagonist, who wanted to know what was happening. Thinking of observing from a corner without being seen, he noticed that his friend's mother was unconscious. Wu Ting, deeply worried, wanted to go with her mother in the ambulance but was told there wasn't enough space. As the ambulance doors closed and it departed, the young woman could only watch her mother being taken away. Seeing his friend's distress, the protagonist stepped forward to ask what was going on. She told him it was her mother. With that, he seemed to make a decision and asked to be taken to her. In the emergency room, as she was being evaluated by medical professionals, the woman's condition was critical. The two doctors examining her identified a rare illness of extreme heat and internal cold. Given this, they concluded that all they could do was send her back home. The daughter and the protagonist arrived just in time to hear the doctor's words. The young woman was devastated by what she heard. Approaching her mother, she asked if she was okay, hoping for good news. In despair, she begged the doctors to save her, even though they insisted they couldn't. The protagonist revealed that he knew the illness and stated that he could treat it, despite its rarity. Of course, his words were seen as an insult by the specialized doctors. To those two doctors, the young man was nothing more than an arrogant fool. Even as one of the doctors asked him to leave, he insisted on staying and trying to help. The two doctors couldn't agree on whether to let the young man proceed or not. One of them suggested they could let him try, but only with the consent of a family member. At such a critical moment, instead of helping, the doctors were making empty promises about what they would do if the young man succeeded. The doctor looked at the daughter and asked if she agreed to let the young man continue the treatment. With tears in her eyes, she agreed, as it was her last option. With that, the doctor gave permission for him to proceed with the treatment. Wasting no time, the protagonist tossed a scroll into the air, as if telling it to step aside. The movements he made near the woman seemed to be tearing something invisible. He was inserting spiritual energy, concentrating on the yin and yang meridians. All the commotion caused the woman to open her eyes and start coughing. Shortly after, she began to vomit. Watching the entire scene, the daughter immediately grabbed her mother's hand, trying to see if she was okay. One of the doctors, without waiting for the young man's full reaction, realized he was in shock. Meanwhile, the other doctor pointed, telling him to look with his own eyes at what had happened. The woman now had life in her gaze. Her eyes were open, and she could see her daughter. Even though she couldn't stop coughing, she was clearly better and understood what her daughter was saying. The protagonist replied to her that the cough would pass, as it was merely a side effect of the recently completed procedure. Faced with such an incredible result, the doctor had no choice but to ask the boy who he was. Somewhat embarrassed, the doctor apologized for not recognizing his abilities earlier. The protagonist said it was no problem and that there was no need to apologize. He just needed to keep his eyes open from then on. The woman, now positioning herself to sit, asked her daughter who that young man was. The girl clarified that he was a classmate. Very grateful, she didn't know what she could do to repay the favor. Smiling, he said it was easy to reimburse him. She just had to take him to her house. Curious, the young woman asked what he wanted to do at her house. He simply smiled mischievously. The scene cuts to the two already at the girl's house, with a pile of empty plates and the protagonist indulging in food. As the young woman watched him, amazed at how much he was eating, he continued devouring everything in front of him. After getting completely full, he let out a huge burp, declaring himself satisfied. The young woman, hugging herself, somewhat flustered and blushing, asked if that was the reimbursement he had mentioned. Now satisfied and getting up, he confirmed that this was the payment for the favor. The young woman lowered her head and murmured that she thought the reimbursement was too simple, but he didn't care. He He simply wished her good night and went to his room to rest. Still feeling flustered, she returned the good night in a timid tone. After he left, she finally raised her head and her eyes sparkled. Now she considered that man someone perfect to marry one day. While she was lost in thought, he was already in the room cultivating, as cultivation was more effective there. He tried to stay focused, but it was difficult with that huge lion king growling at the window. Out of patience, he got up and went over, asking what that dog wanted with him. Letting the beast explain, he discovered that the mansion was being invaded. Upon learning that Anju was in danger, he became extremely furious, to the point that the veins on his face bulged. He grabbed the Lion King in his arms and took off flying, leaving behind only a trail of intense light. At the scene, several excavators and workers were destroying the property. The woman thanked the master for warning her in advance, because if they had been caught by surprise, it could have been worse. The master explained that due to the explosion, his formation had been broken. Willing to do anything to resolve the situation, the woman asked what she should do. He replied that not much was needed, just a drop of blood from her heart. The man assured her that the extraction would be done without surgery. The woman agreed, as long as it could save her father. He then said he would take her to a safe place to perform the procedure. As the two left, the master's students whispered among themselves about the woman's naivety. They knew that after this, she would not survive. For that reason, they hurried to rebuild the formation. The student had to continue the good work that the master had been doing. To achieve that, he began restoring the formation. Everything seemed to be going as planned, and he was successfully controlling the technique. If the protagonist took too long, it would be difficult to break the barrier again. The student below noticed some deformations in the current formation. Excited, the protagonist smirked, as he had finally succeeded. The master's disciples panicked when they saw a figure flying in the sky. They shouted that there was a dog flying on a sword and could hardly believe their eyes. With a darkened expression, the protagonist realized they were trying to reinforce the formation. That explained the Lion King's bad mood. Now that they had spotted a yokai, they couldn't let him destroy the barrier. One of the disciples attempted to cast a spell against the Lion King and the protagonist. That only made him even angrier. Furious, he cursed them as heretics. Without hesitation, he launched a sword strike. The disciples tried to dodge as quickly as they could. However, the protagonist's attack was too strong for them to evade in time. No matter how much they tried, they would end up being hit in some way. From above, Yiwu warned them not to interfere with the formation unless they wanted to shorten their lives. The disciples admitted that, for a moment, they had thought the man was a ghost or a monster, which was why they were startled. However, they could no longer waste time. They had to finish the formation quickly since that man was just an insect. Analyzing those people, the protagonist realized they wouldn't be able to complete the formation alone. Someone more powerful had to be behind it. While he pondered, the disciples began attacking again. They would use techniques to confront the intruder and buy more time. Faced with this, the protagonist decided to use the imprisoned demon spell, Celestial Heart, intending to attack the minds and spirits of his enemies. One of the disciples warned the other that the matrix had already been activated. The man then cast a spell, calling upon the demon god to appear and assist him. In mere moments, the man standing before the protagonist transformed into a demonic creature. Observing carefully, the protagonist found it interesting that there were still people connected to the demonic race. Now the demonized man charged at the protagonist, warning him to stop talking nonsense. He believed that in this way it would be enough to defeat his opponent. However, the protagonist merely blew with a slight amount of power. That simple gesture was enough to destroy the summoning, leaving his adversary in disbelief. "It's a waste of skills to use them only for evil," said the protagonist as he launched his attack. Without hesitation, he grabbed the individual by the neck, since he had chosen to walk the path of darkness. At that moment, it seemed like the protagonist himself was the one possessed, as he tightened his grip around his opponent's neck. After pressing him firmly, he decided to throw him far away. The man fell at the feet of the other disciple, who, worried, knelt down to check his condition. The fallen disciple, struggling, warned his brother that this person was too strong and that he should flee as quickly as possible. After saying this, he lost consciousness, leaving the one still standing even more terrified. His eyes were wide open, his hands trembled with fear, and he ran, while the protagonist merely walked in his direction. The disciple shouted that he would find his master and that he would avenge his fallen brother. However, when he looked forward again, he realized that the protagonist was already there, as if he had teleported in the blink of an eye. Faced with the enemy's terrified gaze, the protagonist ordered him to reveal where the master was. To encourage him to speak, he grabbed his neck and lifted him slightly. Trembling, the man confessed that the master was inside the mansion and that he was the one who had designated the formation. He explained that the master was originally the Grand Master of the mountain, but had been expelled for violating some rules. Later, he founded his own sect and recruited many disciples. Years ago, he discovered that the mansion was surrounded by spiritual clouds and concluded that a treasure was hidden there. Because of this, he secretly created the Yin Fang formation to absorb the Yang energy of people. With this information, the protagonist began connecting the dots and understanding what was happening. Now the disciple who had revealed everything was begging to be spared. However, the protagonist did not seem inclined to grant that wish. He believed that evildoers should meet an appropriate end, and he would certainly deliver that end to that corrupted soul. After settling this matter, he needed to find the master's wife, fearing that she might be in danger. But before anything else, he needed to conceal his own aura, as exposing it could cause problems. As he did this, inside the mansion, the master informed the lady that he was ready to proceed with the ritual. Upon seeing the dagger in the man's hand, the woman questioned what he was planning to do. It was only at that moment that she finally realized she had been deceived all along. The master, aiming at her heart, mocked her naivety for only realizing his true intentions at that instant. With no way to defend herself, the woman merely closed her eyes and made a silent plea for help. Just as she was accepting that her end had come, the protagonist appeared at the exact moment to save her. Determined to make that deceitful master pay, he delivered a satisfying punch to his face. With that, the ill-intentioned master was sent flying a considerable distance. The protagonist now looked different, as if he had a half mask on his face. He called the man an old villain and believed that with this disguise, the master's wife would never recognize him. However, the villain told the young man that someone with such low cultivation should not dare to stand before him. Certain of his victory, he hurled a seal in the protagonist's direction. The seal unleashed a demonic aura that merely growled at the young man. It was all unacceptable, for the villain had surrendered himself to wicked practices, defying the will of the heavens. Saying this, the protagonist simply struck that cursed seal, destroying it completely. Now looking at the villain, he knew that he had to be punished as soon as possible. The false master's eyes were wide open. He could not comprehend how the malevolent spirit had been defeated so easily. However, before him stood the one who would punish him properly. The old master was like a cunning fox, full of tricks up his sleeve, and claimed that he was not easily frightened. At the last moment, he managed to form a magical shield to block the protagonist's attack. However, upon seeing that his shield failed miserably and withstood only a single blow, he summoned malevolent spirits. Confident that old fox used his strongest trump card, the protagonist, however, was also a man full of mysteries and tricks. This time, he would use the power of thousands of saints and gods. With that, he created several chains that emerged from his body, glowing with a celestial blue hue. They wrapped around each of those demonic spirits, preventing any reaction. The protagonist's overwhelming cultivation caught the attention of the false master, who wanted to know his true identity. In response, the young man simply smiled and said that he was his father. The man realized that the day was only getting worse. Seeing his chances of victory diminishing, he was willing to attempt an escape. However, the protagonist would not let him get far. After running a great distance, the master believed he had successfully escaped. But suddenly, a light appeared in the middle of the forest where he was. Chasing after the villain was the Lion King, determined to capture him. The great beast lunged forward, placing its paws on the false master's shoulders and knocking him to the ground. After immobilizing him, it informed the protagonist that he had been caught. Arriving shortly after, the protagonist told the Lion King that the man had called him a dead dog. For that reason, he decided to let the Lion King handle him personally. After that, the beast returned to the protagonist's side, who ran his hand through its mane and praised its cleverness. Looking around, the protagonist felt that things were starting to get worse. The master's wife seemed to be approaching with reinforcements. Sensing this, he and the lion simply disappeared from the scene. Now the security forces had only one mission: to capture the deceitful old man. When the woman finally arrived at the site, all she saw was the fake master lying on the ground. Looking at him, she knew that only another master could have defeated him. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the Lion King were floating in the sky on a great sword. They needed to replenish their energy. After some time, they arrived at a place with a strong concentration of energy. The protagonist planned to cultivate there for a while and wanted the Lion King to protect him. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on his shoulder and called him a stinky brat. The person made it clear that this was not a place where he should be. The protagonist turned around, wanting to know who this person was and why they were trying to stop him. One of the men explained that they were Lord Hu's bodyguards. They stated that, at that moment, their master was practicing his secret technique and that no one could disturb him. The protagonist looked to the side and saw a bald old man. He doubted that this man was practicing anything serious. Speaking in this manner offended the bodyguards. Hearing all the commotion, the master ordered the bodyguards to stop what they were doing. One of them, still holding the protagonist's collar and clenching his fists, looked at the old master. The bodyguard tried to justify his behavior, saying it was due to the young man's disrespect. Very wise, the master wanted to hear the young man's opinion, who said that his technique was incomplete and missing some movements. However, the old man did not appreciate hearing that his technique seemed like a bland dish, especially since it was an ancestral style. Very clever, the protagonist had a proposal to make. He would teach the master the correct positions. The old man, however, found the young man too arrogant but accepted his proposal. He would yield that place to him and, in addition, would become his disciple, recognizing him as a master. Without wasting time, the protagonist began to demonstrate the technique flawlessly. He executed the movements in front of the master, performing an impeccable display. He applied the complete strike on a tree, causing it to fall entirely. Seeing all this, the master became ecstatic to learn that fist technique, which was far superior to his own. The bodyguards, observing from a distance, felt relieved that they had not continued provoking him. After explaining the technique, the protagonist asked if the master had understood the movements. The old man apologized to the young man for his recklessness and also for offending him. However, the protagonist wanted the man to give up the place. Keeping his word, the old man said that the place now belonged to the young man. Hearing this, the protagonist ordered the man to leave, taking the bodyguards with him. Frustrated, the old man turned to the bodyguards and demanded that they leave the place immediately. With everything calmer, the young man sat on the ground and asked the Lion King to watch over him. Before leaving, the old man requested an investigation into the master's background as he wanted to know everything about him. Now with a bit more peace, the protagonist could finally return to cultivating. He paused for a moment and reflected that, in this century, cultivators still existed. The idea of it being just a coincidence didn't seem right. He picked up his phone and realized he needed to learn more about it. He called Q and asked if there was a place at the school where he could obtain information about events from 2,000 years ago. She recounted that recently, the project group had been visiting an archaeological site and that the owner of the tomb dated back 2,000 years. If he met her that night, she could give him more details. He thought that with a tomb from 2,000 years ago, he might find the answers he was looking for. Hours later, night had already fallen, and the protagonist arrived at the meeting place where he joined the project group. He asked Hugh if that was the tomb she had mentioned earlier. He also had doubts about the other people present. As he listened to the explanation that those men were bodyguards hired by the school, a blonde young woman trembled with fear. Q, seeing the girl's fear, told her to stop saying nonsense, as everyone needed to stay together. After some time, they were all inside the cavity. Those who had never been there before were impressed by the size of the underground space. The group leader informed them that their mission this time was to find the missing archaeology team. While speaking, she also mentioned that they needed to recover valuable antiquities and take them back to the school. The protagonist turned abruptly, as if he had noticed something. The young leader saw the change in his expression and asked what was wrong. He explained that he had sensed they were being watched by some masked individuals. Those people were responsible for the disappearance of the previous team and were willing to do the same to them. To achieve this, they would use a certain deadly flower. It was truly dangerous, and even the protagonist became alert. He quickly realized that they were walking into an ambush. With sharp reflexes, he managed to stop some needles that had been thrown in his direction. Things could have been much worse if not for his agility. The assailant who had launched the needles was surprised to see that he had missed. The armed guards were already in position and demanded to know who was attacking them. Then, through a thick curtain of smoke, 3 silhouettes emerged. The 2 young women were frightened and hid behind their older sister, who urged them not to be afraid. The 2 bodyguards warned the intruders to stop immediately, otherwise they would take drastic measures. But the enemies remained indifferent and continued advancing. Faced with this, the bodyguards fired a warning shot. Even so, the attackers kept moving forward, boldly approaching the students and the guards. They threw more needles, altering the trajectory of the fired bullets. The deflected bullets exploded near them, causing a flash that momentarily blinded everyone. Saoru and her friend clung to each other, frightened by the assailants' reaction. As always among this kind of people, there were some who preferred quick amusement with beautiful women, and that was exactly what one of them suggested to the other 2. And it seemed like the suggestion was accepted. Yiwu, completely unconcerned, was cleaning his ear as he warned the men that he was still there. The thug, who thought that only 2 bodyguards were accompanying the 3 beautiful girls, was taken aback. However, the protagonist's presence was so subtle that the enemies assumed he was nothing more than a weakling. With that mindset, one of them attacked the protagonist carelessly. He soon realized they had been far too arrogant. To the protagonist, that attack was laughable. He merely defended himself with a punch, and suddenly, a purple smoke filled the area. The man, thinking he had tricked the young man, began to laugh. The 3 girls quickly covered their noses, as the smell was unpleasant. Waving his hand in front of his nose, the protagonist commented that the odor was repulsive. This caught the attention of the 3 enemies, who were shocked to see that the protagonist was completely unfazed. He simply stared at them and asked if that cheap smoke bomb was supposed to have any effect on him. The 3, humiliated, resorted to Plan B, engaging in close combat. One of them drew a sharp cutting weapon to try and stop the young man. However, this tactic also proved useless, as the protagonist caught the blade with his fingers. With a slight squeeze, he broke the object in half. After that, he decided to teach one of the 3 men a lesson. The other 2 were terrified to see the protagonist deflect a blade with just 2 fingers and still counterattack. Losing patience with their games, the protagonist asked if they would attack one by one or combine their efforts. With a trembling voice, one of them asked the other what they should do. The answer seemed simple, as one of them still had a secret weapon. The protagonist, upon seeing the object, immediately recognized it as a soul-sealing lamp. The man holding the lamp was astonished to realize that the young man knew what the item was. Faced with one of the thug's suggestions that the protagonist should kneel and beg for mercy, he remained silent. The enemies interpreted the silence as fear and grew more confident. One of them repeated the order for him to kneel. The protagonist, without saying a word, simply stepped forward and delivered a kick to one of them in the lower regions. The man, overcome by unimaginable pain, curled up and trembled in agony. Furious, his companion decided that the protagonist needed to be taught a lesson for using such a kick. The man with the lamp decided to unleash his powers against the young man, but the protagonist simply dodged the soul-sealing lamp and with a smile said he liked their plan. He acknowledged that the lamp was indeed a good idea while effortlessly evading the chains thrown at him. With a swift movement, he redirected one of the chains, making it strike one of his own attackers. Hit by the lamp's chain, the man was in terrible condition. His soul literally began to leave his body. Seeing this, the other thug panicked and quickly tossed the lamp away. Then he knelt down and apologized to his younger brother, saying that was not his intention. Holding the spiritual lamp, the protagonist offered the man an idea. Instead of staying on the ground regretting his actions, he should just leave for good. Then he launched one of the chains at the man, sealing his soul as well. The protagonist, still holding the lamp, watched its intense glow. Then he looked to the side as if searching for something. He seemed truly intrigued by something. He looked around but saw no one. However, the team leader was unconscious on the ground. Thinking quickly, he took out a rejuvenating pearl and gave it to her. As soon as she swallowed it, she would wake up. Moments later, she was in his arms. When she opened her eyes, she looked confused, as if searching for something. Meanwhile, Sharu and her friend were also waking up, feeling a tremendous headache. The short-haired girl was startled to see the 3 thugs sprawled on the ground. Running behind the protagonist, she asked if those people were still alive. The other 2 girls just trembled at the sight of the fallen bodies. He realized he had forgotten to deal with that detail and turned to face the leader's question. Then he explained that after one of the bodyguards sacrificed himself, he took the weapon and by sheer luck managed to win. The leader now believed that this young man was incredible. Taking advantage of the situation, she mentioned to the girls that she had found a strange device a little earlier. Placing her hand on a specific spot on the wall, she said she didn't know what it was, but it was glowing intensely. With a slight push against one of the bricks, a secret passage was revealed before them. Even the protagonist was caught by surprise. Not knowing what it was, he asked the leader, who explained that it was the entrance to the main tomb. She then decided that they could go in and take a look. Upon entering the place, the protagonist noticed that the spiritual energy inside was extremely concentrated. After walking through the secret passage for some time, the young leader came across a squad of skeletons arranged in a circle. That formation caught her attention, and she realized that they were all positioned around a sword resting in the center. Observing the sword, she reached out to touch it. The protagonist tried to stop her, asking her not to do that. At the very moment she was about to touch it, she turned to ask what he meant. Before she could react, a violet light blasted her away. Fortunately, she was caught in midair by the protagonist, who softened her fall with his own body. Above them, something strange was happening. Lightning was forming and striking the mountain. Even from a distance, anyone could see the anomaly. A woman watched everything from afar and believed it could be a magical phenomenon related to lightning. This woman was Zhang Jian, who, analyzing the anomaly, concluded that a treasure had appeared. Accompanied by others, she was asked about the first team they had sent. Upon learning of a second team, she ordered some to follow her to the tomb, while others were to guard the exit. Inside the tomb, the protagonist asked the leader how she was feeling. Meanwhile, the 2 girls panicked, convinced that there were ghosts in the place. After the intense violet light, the skeletons began to move. Concerned, the protagonist told everyone to stay behind him for safety. Things got worse when one of the skeletons stood up, holding a shield and a sword, and asked who had dared to interfere. It also questioned the name of its master. However, for the disciples, it was forbidden to mention the master's name directly. Now all the skeletons were holding shields and swords, ready to eliminate the intruders. Knowing they wouldn't reveal the master's name, the protagonist decided to put an end to them. With one swift motion, he initiated the battle, unleashing a blue light upon the skeletons. Then he advanced, attacking everyone around him. That scene frightened the girls as they watched the protagonist using magic. Seeing that everything was heading toward a conclusion, one of the skeletons asked who that person was. The protagonist, standing still with a sword in hand, replied that his identity was not important. He launched a few more attacks and declared that the only relevant detail was that they had made him angry. He commented that, for a soul reborn after 1,000 years, he had already been through many things. That revelation made the leader concerned about the true identity of the young man. Trying to reassure her, he smiled and said they didn't need to fear him, as he was just a good person. As they talked, the sword seemed to be rising. Levitating in the air, it emitted some lightning bolts. Yi Wu, observing carefully, realized that it was a thunder sword infused with electric magic. However, he noticed something else. The three young women could also hear hurried footsteps approaching. It was the woman and some of her followers who had arrived at the scene. She stopped in front of the three with a half-crazed look, convinced that there was a valuable treasure there. The leader no longer understood anything. Everything felt like scenes from a movie. The newly arrived woman appeared hysterical and willing to do anything to claim the treasure for herself. Pointing a sword at the protagonist, she warned that if he knew what was good for him, he would hand over the thunder sword. The protagonist, however, did not seem intimidated in the slightest. One of the men accompanying the woman suggested that he lead the group. Noticing that the young man had a certain level of cultivation, the woman ordered him to attack. When one of the men charged at Yi Wu, he declared that the territory belonged to them. The protagonist simply dodged the attack without much effort. He did this a few times, but since his patience wasn't infinite, he decided to deal with him in a more extreme way. Since they didn't seem to understand, he would have to be a bit more instructive. The woman was confused by what she saw since she knew well the ferocity of her subordinate. Observing the three girls, she realized she could use intelligence since she lacked the strength to win. This caught the protagonist's attention when she took the three as hostages. Now the woman wanted to know what Yi Wu would do. In her mind, this was the best strategy to get what she wanted. She looked at the protagonist and stated that the thunder sword belonged to her. She made it clear that if he didn't do as she wanted, his friends would suffer the consequences. While the woman spoke, the teary-eyed blonde pleaded for help. Raising his hands, Yi Wu stated that it was just a thunder sword and that she could take it herself. Ordering her henchmen to watch over the girls, the woman leaped toward the sword. As soon as she managed to touch it, she declared that the treasure was finally hers. At that very moment, several violet chains surged toward the men holding the girls captive. The woman, incredulous upon hearing the sound of bodies hitting the ground, turned around to understand what was happening. Even seeing it with her own eyes, she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. After rescuing the three girls, the protagonist asked the leader if she was alright. The woman, furious, couldn't believe that after sparing him, he had attacked her subordinates. Showing that he didn't care about her opinion, Yi Wu declared that the only enemy there was her. Retorting, the woman reminded him that she was holding the thunder sword in her hands. Believing she had a great advantage, she attacked the protagonist using the lightning dragon technique. She was certain that he could do nothing against someone wielding the thunder sword. Faced with the strike, Yi Wu simply raised a wall to protect himself. This left the woman speechless, finding it impossible that such a thing had happened. Still in shock, she barely had time to react when the protagonist counterattacked. She could hardly believe it when she heard Yi Wu say that the thunder sword was a spiritual artifact, and because of that, he should teach her how to wield it properly. The woman, however, didn't want to hear anything. If it was a fight he wanted, then that's what he would get. Thinking she had the upper hand, she attempted to counterattack the protagonist multiple times, all in vain. Her hopes were shattered when she threw the thunder sword at him and saw that Yi Wu caught it effortlessly with just 2 fingers. In one swift motion, he took the sword from her hands with ease. Mocking, he told her to pay close attention. Gaining momentum and advancing toward her, Yi Wu demonstrated the correct way to use the sword. Unleashing a powerful strike in her direction, he explained that this was the true purpose of the artifact. The woman screamed, unable to believe that she was actually about to take the hit. At the last moment, Yi Wu hurled the sword toward her but noticed something strange and quickly took it back. Upon analyzing it more closely, he noticed that there was some kind of hidden spell on the blade. Examining it in detail, he realized it was a mysterious code. As he observed the sword, the woman collapsed to the ground, receiving high-voltage shocks. Gradually, her body gave out until she finally touched the floor. The 3 girls watched her fall, stunned. Seeing the look of shock on their faces, he told them not to be afraid because the woman was still alive. The leader, skeptical, wanted him to tell the truth about how he used magic. Driving the sword back into the ground, he sat near it and stated that this was not magic. As the blade continued to emit sparks of lightning around it, he explained that it was cultivation. However, he was satisfied because he had found the thunder spell of the 9 heavens entirely by chance. Outside, the sky showed signs that something was wrong, but to him, everything had been worth it. Elsewhere, an old master noticed a celestial phenomenon above the ancient tomb and sensed that a treasure had appeared. He hurried to call someone, as this person had been away for a long time. He grew irritated upon realizing the number was turned off. This gave him a bad feeling. Something might have gone wrong. Back in the tomb shortly after, he noticed that the woman was beginning to wake up. Still a bit dazed, she coughed as if she were coming back to life. Wasting no time, the protagonist flew toward her. Grabbing her by the neck, he remarked that she clung to life so much that she didn't even want to die. Throwing her to the ground, he demanded to know who she was and who had sent her. The woman revealed that she was part of a sect. He wasn't surprised to learn that cultivation sects still existed in that era. Showing no interest, he stated that the Thunder Sword now belonged to him and that she could leave. However, instead of leaving, the woman firmly held onto the protagonist's arm. Thinking she still wanted the sword, he stared at her, but then she revealed that she wanted to follow him. She said she would do anything he wanted. The reason? She had failed her mission and would surely be eliminated. After hearing her pleas, he simply turned to his friends and said they were leaving. The short-haired girl was moved to know that she would finally leave that nightmare behind. The rejected woman didn't understand what he would do next, as he seemed so indifferent. That was when the protagonist announced that he needed to erase part of their memories related to that moment. Far from there, the next day, at the project team's dormitory, the three girls were lying on a bed. Meanwhile, he was reading some manuscripts that had been unearthed from the tomb. The leader slowly began to wake up. Noticing this, the protagonist wanted to know if she was feeling well. He explained that there wasn't much oxygen in the tomb, which caused them to pass out. After that, he brought them to this place, which was the project team's office. As he spoke, his stomach growled, causing a bit of discomfort. He asked the leader to rest for a bit because he needed to go to the bathroom. Walking through the corridors, he looked around for signs, and upon seeing some people, asked where the men's restroom was. They replied that the signs had been removed due to renovations and that he should go to the left. Following the instructions, he carefully pushed the door open. However, as soon as the door opened, he came face to face with a girl inside the restroom. Startled, she pushed him out, screaming that there was a pervert inside. After throwing him far away, she ran off. Furious, she charged at him, accusing him of trying to spy on her in the bathroom. Without hesitation, she struck him with several needles, which had the effect of paralyzing a person for an entire day. To finish him off, she kicked him, launching him straight onto the toilet. Lying unconscious over the toilet, the woman believed he was simply reaping what he had sown. Unable to move, thrown there without being able to react, he thought he was just another victim of fate. Meanwhile, two students were discussing that a new professor had arrived at the university. Despite being young and just over 20 years old, the doctor was considered a genius. One of them, upon trying to push the door open, noticed that it wouldn't move. Someone had to be inside. Meanwhile, the protagonist was trying, with the little strength he had left, to push the door open with his feet. He realized how ruthless that woman was, as she had completely blocked his meridians. Fortunately, he could still mobilize a bit of internal energy to try to reopen them. With effort, he managed to remove the needles that sealed his movements. He celebrated as he was finally free. Now he needed to find that woman to get his revenge. Meanwhile, she was on her way to gather materials for her lecture. As she organized the documents, the woman assisting her commented that she had heard many praises about the young teacher. After some time, she handed the papers to the newcomer. The two were engrossed in their tasks when three men entered the room asking for Jiangxia. The administrator, visibly upset, warned them that this was the school's office and only authorized personnel were allowed inside. Ignoring her words, one of the men pulled out a sharp object. Then he threw it at the woman, striking her. The young teacher was terrified at the sight. The man walked toward her and said that now the two of them could talk in peace. Trembling, she asked what he wanted. He replied that, above all, he wanted the herb she had purchased. When the young woman said she had already given the herb to someone else, the man, irritated, ordered her to be tied up. She was thrown into a car and taken from the scene. The protagonist, who was passing nearby, heard the screams coming from inside the vehicle. He realized that she was being taken against her will. If that were the case, he would find out. He wanted to check for himself. An hour later, they arrived at a warehouse where the young woman was being held captive. Tied to a chair, she saw the man throw a phone toward her, ordering her to call and retrieve the herb. In an act of defiance, she spat at him. Her action enraged the kidnapper even more. The young woman didn't understand why this man wanted the herb so badly since she had bought it, meaning it rightfully belonged to her. Liu Gixing, to show that he wasn't joking, slapped her across the face. That aggression revealed the worst side of the man. He warned her that he could do whatever he wanted with her. When she retorted that she doubted he would dare go that far, his anger flared even more. Just as he was tearing the young woman's coat, the door burst open with a violent kick. The loud noise startled the criminal, making him turn around. The protagonist entered with a smile and casually commented that the place seemed quite lively. The man's bodyguards asked what he wanted there, as their master was busy. The young woman immediately recognized the man who had blocked her meridians. When asked if he was trying to play the hero, the protagonist replied that he didn't like men who mistreated women, but he would give the kidnapper a chance if he knelt and apologized to the young woman. The man refused. Fearing the young man was in danger, the girl warned him that this man was dangerous and that he should leave. two henchmen positioned themselves in front of the door to prevent him from escaping. Up until that moment, the protagonist hadn't wanted to get too involved, but it seemed they needed a lesson. The young woman, distressed, shouted for him to be careful. But he was no amateur when it came to dodging and defending himself. After blocking his enemy's strike, he seized the opportunity to disarm him and teach him a lesson. A few well-placed kicks reinforced the education. Liu Gixing was terrified, finding it impossible that a single man could cause so much damage. The protagonist, holding the sharp object, looked directly at him and warned that now it was his turn. After saying those words, he lunged toward the young master. Realizing the danger, the man reacted quickly, grabbing the girl as a hostage and using her as a shield. The protagonist found the man even more pathetic than he had imagined for using her as cover. He had other things to deal with, as he sensed someone was about to strike him. Turning just in time, he blocked the attack but still felt the pressure of the force against him. He immediately realized that the person attacking him was a cultivator. As soon as the young master saw Zhang Kang, his confidence returned. Once again, the woman began screaming, warning the protagonist that this man was a martial artist. As she tried to alert him, the opponent licked the blade of his weapon, demonstrating his thirst for battle. Even facing a martial artist, the protagonist showed no fear. Seeing the young man mock him by raising a finger in provocation, the opponent was enraged. He wanted to display his strength at any cost so the protagonist would understand who he was dealing with. After the first exchange, the protagonist acknowledged that his adversary had some skill. However, it was so insignificant that he wouldn't even be able to block a single one of his attacks. The tied-up young woman and the young master were both horrified by the scene. The man who had been thrown aside realized he was up against another martial artist. Now aware of this, he knew he needed to be twice as careful. Launching himself at the protagonist once more, he admitted that he had underestimated his strength. However, he assured that it would be the last time. The protagonist, already out of patience, ended the fight swiftly. Lying on the ground, the man managed to mumble a few words, but he couldn't believe what had just happened. The spoiled young master also seemed incapable of processing reality. The protagonist approached him, and he knew he would have to pay the price. All he could do was kneel and beg for forgiveness. Slapping him, the protagonist told him he should never have coveted the herbs and gone so far. But for him, it was already too late. The protagonist didn't want to hear excuses. In the middle of the process, the young master ended up losing a generous portion of his arm. The protagonist warned that this was a small price to pay for the harm he had done to the girl and ordered him to disappear. Dazed, the man walked away, clutching his injured arm. Looking at the young woman, the protagonist assured her that she was now safe. She wanted to know who he was. He introduced himself, stated his name, and mentioned that she could just call him Yi. Hearing her apologies, he even thought about asking for an explanation but preferred to continue playing the hero. As they talked, a truck suddenly entered the warehouse. The protagonist found it strange. Before he could react, he was thrown far away. From inside the truck, a young woman was tossed to the ground. Someone inside the vehicle wanted to settle everything quickly and ordered them to check if that was the man they were looking for. Looking at the woman thrown to the ground, the protagonist heard her point at him and declared that he had taken the tomb's treasure. At that moment, the protagonist clenched his teeth in rage upon recognizing that woman again. The man in front of him was intrigued to see that the protagonist had not yet suffered significant damage, but reality was different from what he thought. The protagonist had a broken arm, and his body was slightly numb. Concerned, Jiang commented that if she had some silver needles, she could help him. However, he reassured her, saying that he had some healing pearls. He was about to place one in his mouth when a sharp object was thrown at him. The blade struck his arm, preventing him from healing. Lin Kan-yi was willing to do anything to obtain the treasure. He made it clear that if it wasn't given willingly, he would take it by force. To reinforce his threat, he launched a rain of blades toward the pair. The protagonist saw that the man was not joking and used his body to shield the young woman. Most of the sharp objects struck the walls. By positioning his body over the young woman, he managed to prevent her from getting hurt. However, the enemy was strong and wasn't there to play games. The protagonist was already injured and couldn't use his full strength at that moment. Seeing an opening, the enemy prepared to attack. Quickly, he brought his sharp weapon close to the protagonist's neck and said he had one last chance. That woman didn't hesitate for a second. She needed to defend the man who had saved her life. Grabbing a piece of wood, she ordered the man to leave them alone. Without hesitation, she struck the enemy. The man was furious at being hit from behind and turned around in rage. He asked how she dared to attack him. As he prepared to strike her with a blade, she quickly raised the piece of wood to defend herself. Reacting swiftly, the protagonist grabbed his sword and blocked the enemy's blade. He told him that if he really wanted the treasure he so desperately craved, he should try taking it by force. Upon seeing the treasure, the man's eyes filled with greed. The protagonist warned that it wasn't wise to try stealing from others like that. The enemy was caught off guard when the protagonist struck him with the lightning sword. To counterattack, he threw several daggers at the protagonist. Even while attacking the enemy, the protagonist managed to create a protective shield. However, things took an unexpected turn, and he ended up being hit. A skill resembling a giant snake pierced through his stomach. Mocking the situation, the enemy sneered, saying he had thought the protagonist was better than that. Pulling the sword toward himself, he believed the young man was nothing more than a useless show-off. Now with the sword in his hands, he intended to finish off the protagonist. But the protagonist was smarter. He dodged at the last moment and managed to grab the healing pill. He successfully consumed it before the enemy could counterattack. The enemy did not expect the protagonist to recover so quickly. He believed he could contain him with the sword. However, the protagonist's strength was already restored, and he simply grabbed the blade with one hand. He stated that everything that had happened before was because his injuries had been holding him back. Now that he was fully healed, things would be entirely different. After delivering a powerful kick to the enemy, the protagonist made it clear that he would not let him escape. He demanded to know where that man was going. Jiang was extremely worried, unsure of what to do with so many people lying on the ground. To make matters worse, the protagonist had consumed too much spiritual energy and began to feel dizzy. She ran to help him and asked if he was alright. Since she didn't have any silver needles with her, the only solution was to call an ambulance immediately. She grabbed her phone and called emergency services, reporting that there was a patient in critical condition. Half an hour later, he was already inside the ambulance, with the girl by his side on the way to the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, the young woman was informed that the chief doctor was in the emergency room and that she would have to wait. Jiang checked the protagonist's pulse to see if he was alright. It seemed like he had simply fallen into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, the nurses were tending to a man who had fainted just ahead. Without thinking much, she ran off, as she needed to get some silver needles from the Chinese medicine department. During that time, the protagonist slightly opened his eyes, as if waking up from a nap. A bit dazed, he didn't know how he had ended up in a hospital. Getting up from the hospital bed, he knew he needed to rush to the spiritual mind to absorb energy as soon as possible. Somewhere in the hospital, there was a large sign that read, "A divine doctor works here." Someone arrived, informing the doctor that the preparations were almost complete. When he asked about the actors, the man seemed confused. The doctor explained that he needed them to pretend to be treated. The assistant, apologizing, said he would find people to act as soon as possible. Half an hour later, he returned with several actors and explained that their payment would be doubled. The protagonist, who was genuinely unwell, found himself in the middle of this confusion and asked where the hospital exit was. Staggering, he almost fell onto the man who was explaining the procedures to the actors. But the man thought he was just an actor overacting his role. Without thinking much, he pushed the protagonist into a van, praising his performance. With the protagonist and the other actors inside the van, the driver was ordered to head straight to the event location. At the hospital, Jiang returned, and upon looking for the protagonist, she found only an empty hospital bed. At the event venue, many people eagerly awaited to see Dr. Ixui perform a live treatment. The auditorium was nearly packed with excited spectators. The event organizer informed the doctor that all the actors were ready. With everything set, the host asked the audience to welcome Dr. Xu with applause. Amidst the crowd, a blond man in a lab coat calmly stood up as he was called to the stage. After a brief speech, he stated that everyone should keep an open mind because his job was to save lives. Lifting a red cloth, he said he would get straight to the point. Beneath the fabric, there were several needles. He explained that these needles were a relic, a family treasure. This made the spectators feel honored by his explanation. He then began selling the needle kit as if it were a rare item, promoting it as if it were an auction. Some people grew suspicious as everything seemed like just a sales pitch. The so-called divine doctor was already used to pulling scams and knew exactly what to do next. He asked for someone to bring him a sick person so that he could heal them in front of everyone. For this occasion, the host used the protagonist, who was unconscious on a hospital bed. Before anything else, he asked everyone to check the weakened state of the man. Then he took the needles and pretended to begin the procedure. However, an amulet he was carrying started to resonate with the protagonist. This caused the protagonist to slightly open his eyes and see the doctor standing in front of him. Believing that he was just another actor going off script, the doctor didn't notice anything unusual. Still weak, the protagonist wondered where the spiritual energy he had absorbed had come from. Looking more closely, he noticed that the fraudulent doctor was wearing a jade pendant hanging from his clothes. Speaking in a low voice, the doctor asked him to cooperate so that the show could go on. The protagonist, also speaking quietly, said he didn't want money, he just wanted the jade pendant. Initially, the doctor refused, claiming that it was a family heirloom, but under pressure, he eventually agreed. Thus, the protagonist slightly closed his eyes while the doctor pretended to perform the treatment. The moment he applied the first needle, the protagonist suddenly sat up, startling the doctor.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.